Okay, Bezat Hashem, we're starting today the bottom of Vav Amud Aleph, and today's Amud is going to be Vav Amud Bet. Today we're going to have continued discussion of the Beraitta we left off with yesterday. And we're going to analyze 4 parts of the Beraitta and discuss them to understand exactly what the Beraitta is teaching us. If we remember, we left off yesterday discussing 4 Reshuyot. That's where we left off with in Hilchot Shabbat. We had a lot of halachot in this Beraitta, and we're going to analyze each part of the Beraitta now to understand clearly what was being said. So let's just remember what the Beraitta said yesterday. We had 4 Reshuyot on Shabbat. We have Reshut HaYachid, Reshut HaRabin, Carmelit, and Mekom Petur. 4 different places, or domains. And we said they have various halachot that govern each place. So now, Bezat Hashem, let's get started going through each of these parts to understand the depth of the Beraitta. So the Gemara says like this, Amar Mar, it's the second to last line on the page. Amar Mar. The Beraitta told us yesterday. Let's just remember, the beginning of the Beraitta said, Ezuhi Reshut HaYachid. What is a Reshut HaYachid? Charitz Shehu. I'm just quoting from the Beraitta. Charitz Shehu Omek Asara V'Rachav Dalid. You have a ditch, a hole, that's 10 tvachim tall and 4 tvachim by 4 tvachim wide, an area. V'chein geder shehu gavoa yud, or if you have a fence that's 10 tvachim tall and rachav dalet, again 4 by 4 tvachim. Zuhi reshut hayachid gemura. This is a reshut hayachid gemura, total reshut hayachid. So as Rashi told us, we're going to have to analyze the necessity for zuhi reshut hayachid gemura, because we already said ezu reshut hayachid. So you don't need to say again, Zuhi Reshut HaYachid Gemura. And we said the same thing by Reshut HaRabim. So the Gemara is going to ask right away, what is it coming la'afuke? What is that last sentence, Zuhi Reshut HaYachid, what is that coming to exclude? Also, it's going to ask, what is Gemura coming to exclude? Meaning it sounds like there's something that's not Gemura. So what is it coming to teach us? So the Gemara says like this, Amar Mar, the Beraitta had said, Zuhi Reshut HaYachid. It told us, what is Reshut HaYachid? It told us the example. And then it emphasized at the end, this is Reshut HaYachid. So says the Gemara, Lim'ute mai. What is this coming to exclude? Meaning, what is not considered Reshut HaYachid that the Beraitta is using extra words to say? Some people might say that is Reshut HaYachid, but this is not what the Beraitta will hold. So the Gemara tells us, let me just speak this out, and we'll see it inside. It's going to exclude a psak of Rabbi Yehuda. We know to be considered a Reshut HaYachid, you need to have, now I'm just going to go with the way the Gemara reads, simple pshat. You need to have 4 walls. You need to have an area, again, 4 by 4 tvachim area, 10 tvachim walls, but it also has to be enclosed, fenced in by 4 walls. There is a shita who holds, mida oraita, you could have 2 and it's also good. Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. So what we're going to say is, our Mishnah in saying Zui Reshut HaYachid is to say, our Mishnah holds you have to have 4 walls to be considered Reshut HaYachid. Not like Rabbi Yehuda says, 2 is sufficient, 2 is enough. Now let me illustrate to you the case of Rabbi Yehuda. Very interesting case. You mind closing the door? Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda's case is a very creative case. Listen to this case. I'm going to make an example here. Demonstration. Shouldn't use Svarim really, I should use the cups instead. Here. Let's say this is my house, okay? And then on one, there's a street in between. And then I own another house on the other side of the street. Okay? My property. Reshut HaRabim, my property. Okay? Now we have walls at the ends of each of my property. So what are we looking at here? My property, my property. In between is Reshut HaRabim. And there's 2 walls, one on each side of the street. So Rabbi Yehuda says like this. Mida oraita, since the area in between has 2 walls that are considered property walls of Reshut HaYachid, that is considered Reshut HaYachid Mida oraita, the area in between. Therefore, Mida oraita, I should be allowed to carry 4 amot inside of it. It's not a problem. That's Reshut HaYachid. However, Rabbi Yehuda holds Midrabanan, similar to what we mentioned yesterday about, remember we spoke about the Chatzerot and that whole inyan, similar idea, because it looks like Reshut HaRabim, says Rabbi Yehuda, you should use a lechi or a korah, similar to what we discussed yesterday, on both sides of the ends of the walls. Either lechi is the standing beam, korah is the cross beam, to show this is actually Reshut HaYachid, not Reshut HaRabim. But again, that's only midrabanan. Rabbi Yehuda holds midoraita. On the Torah level, this area is already, because you have two walls, Reshut HaYachid. So comes our Mishnah to say, no, that's not considered Reshut HaYachid because it's not fenced in by four walls. Okay? That's what the Gemara is going to say. Let's see it inside now. Says the Gemara, Amar Marzui Reshut HaYachid lem'utei mai. So what is it coming to exclude? Lem'utei had Rabbi Yehuda, excluding the Shita of Rabbi Yehuda. And it's actually quoted in the Beraitta too. We didn't quote it in ours though. The Tanya, as the Beraitta teaches us, now, Yeter al-ken, Rabbi Yehuda says even more than this. Tosafot adds, what was the more than this? So, Rabbi Yehuda is actually coming off of a different case, where you have a public domain where there's like a highway that has fences on both sides of the highway. Underneath it, there's two fences underneath it. Sorry, there's a highway. Okay, imagine a highway with fences on both sides of the highway. So Rabbi Yehuda says in such a case, since there's fences on both sides, and this is a chidush which I'm not going to get too much into, so if you don't get it, it's okay. The edges of the highway itself are looked at as they go down to the ground, so it's looked at as closed in. That's considered Reshut HaYachid. But he says on top of that, Yeter al-ken, even more than this, Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Mi sheyesh lo bet batim, b'shnei tzidei Reshut HaRabim. He has two homes on the two sides of the public area, like we described. So, Midoraita, says Rabbi Yehuda, that's considered a Reshut HaYachid. However, the rabbis came along and they said, it looks like Reshut HaRabim. So do something to show this is really a private area. So, Oseh lechi mikan v'lechi mikan. What he should do is, again, this is one house, this is the other house. Put a beam here, put a beam here. On the both sides where there would be a potential look, it looks like it's a public area. Or kora mikan v'kora mikan. Or put a cross beam on both ends of it so that it's closed in a more clear sense. V'nose v'noten b'emtza. And then you can carry in the middle. It means you're not allowed to carry in the middle of Reshut HaRabim. But now, since midoraita, it's considered Reshut HaYachid, and there's no issue rabbinically because you put the two lechis or the two koras, so now you could carry inside, no problem. Amru lo, the Chachamim said back to Rabbi Yehuda in the Beraitta, Ein ma'arvin Reshut HaRabim bik'ah. You can't create an eruv in Reshut HaRabim like this. They said no. You have two walls, and two walls is not considered a Reshut HaYachid, midoraita. You can't create an eruv in a Reshut HaRabim. We've already said that. You can't create an eruv in Reshut HaRabim to make it into Reshut HaYachid, and this is not sufficient. So what's the Gemara telling us? In the context here, Zuhi Reshut HaYachid. What's the Beraitta adding? It's saying what we just described, i.e. where there's four walls on each side, that's Reshut HaYachid. But where there's only two walls, the ends of the properties, that's not Reshut HaYachid. That not even on rabbinic Beraitta is that not Reshut HaYachid. That's not Reshut HaYachid, that's Reshut HaRabim. Asks the Gemara, Va'amai karole gemura. Okay, so you explained to me why the Beraitta says Zuhi Reshut HaYachid. But why does it have to say Zuhi Reshut HaYachid gemura? Why? You can move over so you can see me better. I like to see you. So the question the Beraitta, the Gemara says is now fine. I understand why it's saying Reshut HaYachid. This is Reshut HaYachid. To exclude if it's two walls, it's not Reshut HaYachid. But why does it say this is Reshut HaYachid Gemura? What is the Gemura adding? It's an extra word, total. So let me just speak outside what it's going to say and then we'll see it inside. The Gemara is going to answer like this. You may have thought that the rabbis really agreed to Rabbi Yehuda. Midoraita, if there's two walls, it's considered Reshut HaYachid midoraita. But they're machmir over Rabbi Yehuda, meaning they'll give the space in between the chomer of Reshut HaYachid, but not the leniencies of Reshut HaYachid. Maybe that's the argument of the Rabbanan. We agreed be'etzem, if you have two walls, it's already Reshut HaYachid on the biblical level, on the Torah level, midoraita. But they're machmir over Rabbi Yehuda. But by saying Gemura, what they're adding to that is to say, no. With two walls, bichlal, it's not considered Reshut HaYachid. It's completely Reshut HaRabim, and therefore, this is completely removed from the category of Reshut HaYachid. Now let's illustrate that inside. So the Gemara says, V'amai karole Gemura, ma'od etema, because you may have said like this. Now listen good to this. This is a little bit technical. Ki pligi Rabbanan alei de Rabbi Yehuda. So you might say, really, the rabbis agree to Rabbi Yehuda. 2 walls is already considered Reshut HaYachid. Beraitta. Beraitta, it's Reshut HaYachid. So when do they argue? The lo havi Reshut HaYachid, it's not like Reshut HaYachid. Hani mili litaltel. It's only that you don't have the kula, the leniency, to carry inside of it. Means maybe the rabbis say you don't have the kula, that it's like Reshut HaYachid, because even though midoraita it's like Reshut HaYachid, you don't have the kula where machmir to say it's like Reshut HaRabim in this regard, you can't carry 4 amot inside of it. Right? What's that? Pass a different, so pass a different story, I'll see in a minute. Maybe really they agree midoraita, it's like Reshut HaYachid. But in regards to carrying 4 amot inside of it, you're not allowed. That's where they disagree. Avalizrok, but in terms of throwing, which really means a transfer, in terms of transferring from one reshut to another, module, they would agree. They would say, look, it is considered reshut hayachid, and therefore, to transfer from it to reshut harabim would be asur, would be chayav. So what they would then be saying is, be'etzem, in the underlying ikar, we agree with you, it's reshut hayachid. But we're not able to be makil, we're not able to be lenient to allow you to carry inside of it. But we are going to be machmir to say it as the chomer of Reshut HaYachid, which means you can't carry from it or throw from it into Reshut HaRabim or vice versa, because it's like a Reshut HaYachid. And then it comes out, they're not really arguing be'etzim in the underlying status of this place, they're just arguing in terms of the chumrah. So kamash malan, that's what the Beraitta means when it says Gemurah. No, in order to be considered Reshut HaYachid, it has to have 4 walls. Otherwise, it's not even considered Reshut HaYachid. On the Torah, forget about it. Across the board, it's not Reshut HaYachid unless it has 4 walls. That's what it's saying. So therefore, in this case where there's 2 walls, Rabbi Yehuda says that's already midoraita Reshut HaYachid. No, that's not Reshut HaYachid. Now I need to mention something over here which is very important. There is a discussion, bichlal. Is it necessary for it to be Reshut HaYachid midoraita to have 4 walls or even 3 walls? Even 3 walls.
Talking about sukkah, similar to sukkah.
So sukkah is a different story. In regards to rishuyot on Shabbat, do you need 4 walls or 3 walls? Our Gemara just seemed to conclude that according to the Rabbanan, you need 4 mechitzot, 4 partitions, 4 walls to be considered Reshut HaYachid on Shabbat. But there are shitot who say 3 walls would also be considered Reshut HaYachid midoraita, which actually gets into the question when we spoke about yesterday, where you have the chatzerot that open up into the Reshut HaRabim, midoraita, it's Reshut HaYachid, etc. It gets in lechi korah, exactly like that story. There is such a discussion. We're not going to get too much into it, but we should just take away. The Gemara here implies that the shita of the Rabbanan is, in order to be considered Reshut HaYachid, there has to be 4 mechitzot, 4 walls closing in this area.
Good.
Yeah. Now I will add one more point, which is kedai to know. What happens, and we spoke about this before, if you have some sort of a platform, like a platform, like a stage,
okay,
and it's 10 tvachim tall and it's 4 by 4 tvachim. So what's the halacha? 10 tvachim tall, 4 by 4. It's Reshut HaYachid, but where's the walls? You don't have walls. You just said you need to be closed in by walls. That's what I just said. So why is that considered Reshut HaYachid?
Because of the height and the tvachim.
But you don't have walls. You don't have, where are the walls? If you need 4 walls, where are the walls? You're right, that would be, we said at the end of the Beraitta, it's Reshut HaYachid, but why? So this is one of those imaginary halachot we have to use.
Oh, that we have like the imaginary walls?
It's imagination over here. So Rashi tells us, the rule is called
chada something.
Good achit, this is good asik.
Yeah.
This is good. Good achit means the walls go down. Good asik means the walls go up. This comes up in Hilchot Sukkah as well.
Good
which
achit,
means
good asik.
Good achit is that you look at the walls that are above as if they go down. Okay. And good asik means you look at the walls that are below as if they go up. So what it means in the context here is, if you have a platform that's 10 tvachim tall, 4 by 4 tvachim, we look at the sides of the platform as if they continue up and it forms imaginary walls. That's the idea. Even though there's no walls, that's considered...
Because of the height?
Because of being 10 tvachim tall, exactly. That's you're allowed to use that strategy. That it looks, that's now it's Reshut HaYachid. Exactly, just kedai to point out. This comes up a lot in Masechet Sukkah, these types of discussions. Very interesting idea. Let's continue. Amar Mar, let's move on to the second point now. So the Beraitta had said also, we listed all the areas. We said, Ezui Reshut Harabim. So we said this highway and the plaza and then all these big areas. So we listed all of them. And then again, it finished off with the same idea, Zui Reshut Harabim. Again, the extra words. This is Reshut Harabim. Okay. So the same question. Lim'utei mai. Why do you need to repeat it? Obviously, it's excluding something. So what is it excluding? So the Gemara here says a fascinating halacha. There's a Mishnah in Eruvin that discusses this idea. Listen to this story. The Jews from, let's say, Bavel, so they were olel regel, right? They would come to Yerushalayim, or even from Eretz Yisrael itself. Come to Yerushalayim to celebrate the Chagim. The problem is, they would sometimes stay on the side of the road. Now, the road is Reshut Harabim. Right. So let's say they had their little tent set up over there. Okay, fine. They were staying over there on the side of the road, established a place for Shabbat, beautiful. Now, they needed to drink water. So they had wells. They had borot, they had these pits in the ground that had water. Actually, we know how important this was from Masechet Ta'anit. We discussed how important the water was for the Lei Regalim, fine. But here's the issue, listen to this. Where are the wells? They're in Reshut Harabim. But the wells are 10 tvachim deep and 4 by 4 tvachim. Which means the wells, they're 10 tvachim deep and they're 4 by 4 tvachim in area. Which means the wells are Reshut HaYachid. Which would mean if you draw water out of the wells and you put it on the side of the well, what have you already done? From Reshut HaYachid to Reshut HaRabim, that should be Asur D'Oraita. Everybody sees the problem here. So the rabbis came along and they said, we are going to allow you to construct a less than real mechitzot around the well to make the area around the well also Reshut HaYachid. So you could draw water and drink the water and it won't be motzi mereshut l'reshut, Reshut HaYachid to Reshut HaRabim. You will build walls around it, but not real walls, as we'll see in a minute. They're called pasei biraot. We'll explain that in a minute. So it's like eruv in a certain way, allowing you to now draw water from the well to around the well because the whole area will be enclosed like a Reshut HaYachid. Now what is pasei biraot? Pasei biraot is basically, actually Art Scroll is a good picture if you want to look at it. It's these L-shaped sticks that they put on the 4 corners around the well, right angles. So they put these right angles, these L-shaped sticks on the 4 corners around the well. So imagine the well is in the middle, and then they put these little corners around it that were
like poles,
like poles, but L-shaped, not round, but rather like this. Okay. Meaning around the 4 corners. And the rabbi said, now this will constitute not a Reshut Harabim anymore, but rather a Reshut HaYachid. So now you could draw water into that area and drink water.
Right?
Like an L shape. You could look, Art Scroll has a great picture if you want to take a look.
I got it.
L shape, meaning like
So it's giving you like an imaginary...
imaginary 4 walls. Now there is an important measurement here, which is that these were an amma by an amma. Each of the corners was an amma by an amma. And they were also 10 tfachim away from each other. It couldn't be more than 10 tfachim away from each other. 10 tfachim away would already make it that this can't be considered a wall. But now we could imagine as if this is entirely closed in, it's Reshut HaYachid, you could draw water. But now listen to this problem. This is in the Reshut HaRabim, it's in the public area. So what's going to happen? If the people are walking and it's the path that people would walk, people are going to walk through this area, and therefore Rabbi Yehuda's opinion is, if people are going to walk through this area, you can't tell me that you look at it as imaginary walls to make a Reshut HaYachid if people are constantly walking through it.
And they pass by the
point, no, the point is that you can't tell me use an imaginary law here to make fake walls if people are just using it as public thoroughfare, as the highway, because that's clearly Reshut HaRabim. So Rabbi Yehuda's position is, if this is where people are walking, it's mevatel this whole idea and it's no longer Reshut HaYachid. And therefore Rabbi Yehuda actually holds, if people wanted to walk through there, make sure they go around. Have them go around, because if they go around, at least this area could be understood as Reshut HaYachid. The Rabbanan hold, however, doesn't make a difference. Once the rabbis allow us to make these 4 corners, even if the public is walking through there, it's still now considered Reshut HaYachid. So what the Gemara is going to say is, that's what the Beraitta means to add. Not like Rabbi Yehuda. It says, Zui Reshut Harabim, meaning this would be considered a Reshut Harabim, the examples of our Mishnah, a highway, etc. But where you have these four corners, even if people are walking through, that's still Reshut HaYachid. It doesn't make a difference. The thoroughfare of people does not negate, it's not mevatel, the corners that allow it to be considered Reshut HaYachid. Let's read that inside. Says the Gemara, the Tanan, Sulamuta idach Rabbi Yehuda, that excludes a different position of Rabbi Yehuda. The Tanan, the Mishnah Eruvin tells us, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yehuda says, Im aita derech reshut harabim ifsaktan, if the way of the public was interrupting, so the meaning they were walking through, yisalkena litzdadim, push them around it. Means make sure the people walk around it so it doesn't make this batel, this idea of being a reshut hayachid, for these pasei biraot, these corners. It's not necessary. If it's reshut hayachid, the fact that people are walking through it doesn't make a difference. So that's why they say harei zo reshut harabim, meaning the general public thoroughfare is reshut harabim, but this is reshut hayachid. That's what they're saying against the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda.
Just because the people passing by?
It doesn't make a difference. Rabbi Yehuda holds it does, the Chachamim say it doesn't. Exactly. That's the Chachamim. It's still reshut hayachid. That's what the Chachamim hold. Exactly. Says the Gemara, V'amai karolei Gemura. Again, the same question as before. Why does the Mishnah say, Harei zu reshut harabim Gemura? What's the emphasis? So this, the Gemara just says, Aidi de Tana Reisha Gemura. Since in the first part about reshut hayachid it said Gemura, Tananami Seifa Gemura, it also said in the Seifa. Sometimes we find this idea that it wants to keep consistent. It wants to keep the Mishnah the same way throughout, so it used the same language here as well. Now, I want to just point something out. I don't want to get too deep into this, but there is a contradiction here when you think about it. Because in the previous case, when you're talking about two walls, what's the position of Rabbi Yehuda? Two walls, it's considered Reshut HaYachid. But here, when you have the four corners, he says it's not considered Reshut HaYachid. So it's almost like Rabbi Yehuda is...
Because there is an existing walls?
Rabbi Yehuda is inconsistent. And the Gemara actually points this out in Eruvin, and the Rabbanan are also inconsistent, because in regards to two walls, they say it's not Reshut HaYachid. In regards to these four corners, they say it is Reshut HaYachid. So if you say these fake walls, or these less than real walls are effective, it should be effective in both. If not, it shouldn't be effective in either.
But there is tzorich here.
So what the Gemara Eruvin explains is, it's a matter of perspective. What's considered more of an enclosure? Rabbi Yehuda's position is, if you have two real walls, that's more chashuv, that's more significant as Reshut HaYachid than four corners. Four corners is not two real walls even. So that could be considered Reshut HaYachid, not four corners. The Rabbanan say, four corners, at least you have four that look like four walls, versus two walls, that doesn't look like walls at all, for Reshut HaYachid, and that wouldn't be considered Reshut HaYachid. It's the Gemara and Eruvin explains that idea.
The wall have to be 10 tvachim and up, right?
I'd imagine, yes, the Chorah, yeah.
So we're talking, let's imagine I-95, for example, they have two walls on the side. If you close it, it becomes Reshut HaYachid?
No. So that's the thing. You cannot do this. We're going to see in a minute. But in general, to make this in Reshut HaRabim, you can't be Ma'arev. You can't create Reshut HaYachid in a Reshut HaRabim like that. It's not really effective. You can't create such an Eruv. We're going to see it right now. Let's see. Asks the Gemara, why didn't the Mishnah also include the case of a midbar, a desert? A desert also should be called Reshut HaRabim. It didn't list that as one of them in the Mishnah. And why do we ask this? Tanya, because the Beraitta says, Ezi Reshut HaRabim. What is the definition of Reshut HaRabim? Sratya, which is again the highway, Uplatya Gdola, big plaza, Umabuot HaMefulashin, open streets at the ends of both sides, V'Midbar. In this Beraitta it says Midbar. Why didn't our Mishnah list Midbar as well? Amabaye Lakasha. Kan bizman she'Yisrael shoyim b'midbar, kan bizman hazeh. The Beraitta we just quoted is talking about when the Jews were in the midbar. When the Jews were traveling in the desert, so you had the Jewish population there, that became a Reshut HaRabim. But in general, people don't travel, they don't live in the midbar, they don't travel significantly through the midbar, and therefore that would be considered not a Reshut HaRabim, it wouldn't be considered a Reshut HaRabim. Now, Tosafot points out over here something that we referenced before. He says, Mashma k'tzat te'eina Reshut HaRabim ele im kein mitzuyin sham shishim ribo kemo b'midbar. It would only be considered Reshut HaRabim if you had 600,000 people found there. Meaning that if you have, like the Knesset Yisrael in the Midbar, 600,000 people, that would constitute a Reshut HaRabim. And this is a very important point, because this would make a chiluk between Reshut Harabim and like a Carmelit, for example, like the ocean. If it's an area that is populated, that some explain even it means that 600,000 people have access to it, even if they're not traveling through it every day, but they have access to it, like Yossi mentioned yesterday, Brooklyn, they say Brooklyn? Yeah. Brooklyn, for example. Parkway. Some argue on the capacity to make an Erev there at all, because you can't be ma'arev in a Reshut Harabim. The only way it would work is if it's considered Carmelit, maybe that would be effective. But to be considered Reshut Harabim, meaning 600,000 people have access, it wouldn't be necessarily acceptable in the first place. That's a very important point that Tosafot mentions here. Let's go ahead, Chevra. Let's go to the third part of the Beraitta now. Amar Mar, the Beraitta had told us, in all of these cases, if you carry from one of these Rishiyot to the other, either Rabim, Tiachir, or vice versa, Imotzi ve'echnis, if he brought it out or in, Bishogeg chayav. If it was done unintentionally, is chayav chatat. He's chayav a korban chatak. B'meizid, if it was intentionally, anush, karet v'niskal. He gets karet if it was without witnesses and warning, without edim and hatra'ah, and skila if it was with witnesses and warning. Asks the Gemara, this whole sentence seems unnecessary. You don't have to say this. B'shogeg chayav chatat pshita. It's obvious that if you do b'shogeg, you're chayav chatat. Rashi explains why, because that's the rule. Whenever you have an aveira that intentionally, if you do it b'mezid, you're chayav karet. So then if you do it b'shogeg, the rule is you're chayav chatat. Since on Shabbat we know you're chayav karet b'mezid, so you don't even need to say, you could just say chayav, I know you're chayav chatat, because that's the standard rule. So the Gemara answers, b'mezid anush karet b'niskal, it's derichalei. No, the chidush of the Beraitta is to say that if it's b'mezid, the punishment is karet or skila. That's a chidush. Says the Gemara, hanami pshita. If you do b'mezid, so then it's karet and skila. That's also pshita. Hanami pshita. Why is that also pshita? Because we know in the Torah we have a section of the mikoshesh etzim who gather the wood in the midbar, and it's chayav skila. So we know this halacha. What is the Beraitta teaching us? So the Gemara answers based on a very interesting backstory. Hakamash malan kedirav. The chidush of our Mishnah is that you are chayav skila for this melachav hotza'ah b'mezid, like Rav. The Amar Rav said the following. Remember we spoke about Rav, his Rebbe was Rabbi Chia.
And Rabbi Yehuda Nasi.
And Rabbi Chia was, Rabbi was Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. Yes. Exactly. The Amar Rav said the following. Matzati Megillat Starim, I found a hidden scroll, Be Rabbi Chia, in the Beit Midrash of Rabbi Chia. So Rashi explains something very interesting over here. We know the Gemara in Masechet Gitin tells us that really Torah Sheba'al Peh is not allowed to be written down. Torah Sheba'al Peh, Torah Shebichtav needs to be written down. Torah Sheba'al Peh is not allowed to be written down. That's the halacha. However, we know what happened. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi recognized it was Yeridat Hadorot and people were forgetting the Mishnayot, so he wrote them down. But before Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, you're not allowed to write down Torah Sheba'al Peh. He came and he said, Ifer Toratecha, It La'asot La'Hashem Elokecha, Ifer Toratecha, fine. But what happened beforehand, before Rabbi Yehuda Nasi came along, if a Talmid had a great chidush, and he was worried he was going to forget that chidush. So the answer is, it was Torah Sheba'al Peh, but there was a leniency to write it down so that it's not forgotten.
For himself.
For himself. Oh, so this is discussed in the Mefarshim. You're not allowed to write it down in general, but for himself, there's leniencies. A student could write it down for himself to remember that chidush so it's not forgotten. After Rabbi Yehuda Nasi had written down the Mishnayot, the Torah Sheba'al Peh is allowed to be written down, and we have much of Torah Sheba'al Peh written down, most of them, everything. But there was these scrolls that had been written down before. They were called Megillat Starim, because since the students used to write them down, and they weren't really supposed to, they wouldn't leave it out for everyone to see, they would hide it. Because it was Torah Sheba'al Peh written down, so they would hide them. So Rav, who I saw, interesting, Rav was the student of Rabbi Chia, and he was also his secretary. So he had access to all of Rabbi Chia's hidden scrolls. He had access to all of the other information. So one time Rav was going through Rabbi Chia's Beit Midrash, and he found one of these Megillat Starim that was written down, and this is what it said, by Isi ben Yehuda. What does it say? It says, Dama Matzati Megillat Starim Be Rabbi Chia. I found this hidden scroll in Rabbi Chia's Beit Midrash, V'katuv ba, and it wrote the following inside. Isi ben Yehuda Omer, Isi ben Yehuda says the following, Avot Melachot Abayim Chasa Achat, that there are 39 Av Melachot, primary Yisurei Shabbat, Ve'eno Chayav Ela Achat. Now, this is a very strange language, but he said, the scroll said, Isi ben Yehuda said, you're only chayav one time. Now, what it sounds like is, if a person did all 39 melachot behelem achat in one act of forgetting, he would only be chayav one chiyuv. One karet, one korban, etc. Now, why would that be? What would be the logic in that? So the logic would be, it would be like doing the same avera many times, where you're only chayav one onesh really for that, if it's behelem achat in one act of forgetting. We would look at all of the melachot of Shabbat as one guf avera, one essential avera, not as separate averot. That's what it sounds like the scroll was saying. But the problem with that is we know that that's not true. Aini, is that true? Of course, we know. How do we know? Because the Mishnah tells us, I believe it's in Masechet Shabbat later, it says, Avot melachot 40 chasa achat, that there are 39 av melachot, and then it lists what those 39 are. So the Gemara is going to ask there, Avinan Ban, it asks, Minyana lamali, why does it, not manyana, Minyana lamali, why does it have to say 39? We can count that there's 39, so why does it say 39? If Amar Rabbi Yochanan said, She'ima sa'an kulam behelem achat, it's saying there's 39, and if you did all of them in one act of forgetting, chayav kol achat be'achat, you are chayav 39 times. So says the Gemara, you see clearly, it's not guf avera achat, it's not one avera, each one is a separate avera, you're chayav 39 different times. So that can't be what the scroll was saying. Ella, so it must be, what was this scroll, Isi ben Yehuda, saying? Ema eno chayav al achat mehen. Now this is very cryptic, what he's saying, very hidden. But what he's saying was, it's true, you'd be chayav for 30, you're only chayav for 38. One of those melachot, you're not going to be chayav skila for. Tosafot points out over here, you would be chayav chatat for all of them. There's one of them you're not going to be chayav skila for, but he didn't say which one it is. That's what Isi ben Yehuda meant to say. So no, the opposite. Va'akamash malan. So says the Gemara, that's what the Beraitta is teaching us when it says chayav skila. Why does it have to say b'mezir chayav skila? It's teaching us ha'me'anach delo mesafkan. This one, this hotza'ah is not the one to be mesupak, to be within that safek, that you would be not chayav skila based on that. Now what that one is, unclear. What the Beraitta is telling us here is hotza'ah is not that one. Chayav skila, it means b'mezir chayav skila. It's emphasizing the fact this is not the one that you would not be chayav skila for. That's why it emphasizes that here. You are chayav skila. So but you need the chidush because Isi ben Yehuda, as we quoted, held one of them you're not chayav for. It's emphasizing here that hotza'ah is not that one. It's not that one.
It's reducing one of the 38 minutes.
Now what that one is, we didn't say. We're not going to say here. We'll discuss, God willing, there. But it's not hotza'ah. That's the point. All right, let's finish off the fourth section over here. We said in the Beraitta, Amar Mar, Aval Yam. We said this was the examples of Carmelit. So Carmelit it's not Reshut Tarabim, not Reshut Tayachid. Yam, the sea, Bik'ah, open area, fields. The Istavnit, and the bench area. The Carmelit, as well as Carmelit, Einan lo Kirshut Tayachid velo Kirshut Tarabim. It's not Kirshut Tayachid nor Kirshut Tarabim. We said it means if you carry from the Carmelit to Reshut Tayachid or Rabim, it's Patur Aval Asur, but it's not Chayav Midoraita. Asks the Gemara, Ubekaina lo Kirshut Tayachid velo Kirshut Tarabim. Is that true? Bik'ah is an open area where they planted grains, for example. Is that not Reshut Yachid or Reshut Tarabim? I'm going to show you a Mishnah in Ta'arot that seems to imply that an open planted area is like a Reshut Hayachid. Let me just explain it outside and we'll see it inside. We have a halacha as follows. Two halachot. There is Reshut Tarabim and Reshut Hayachid regarding Hilchot Shabbat. Okay, Reshuyot for Shabbat. And then there's also another thing which is Reshuyot for Tum'ah. For Tum'ah. Now what is Tum'ah? There's a rule. If something is Reshut Hayachid, and there's a safek, if someone became Tameh in that area, safek Tum'ah Reshut Hayachid is Tameh. I'll explain in a minute. But safek Tum'ah Reshut Harabim is, if it's a safek Tum'ah in public domain, is Tahor. And where do we know this from? What's the mikor for this? It's from Sotah. Because by Sotah, which is a woman who's suspected of adultery, but suspected, we don't know that she was definitely mizaneh from her husband. What's the halacha of such a woman? Until she drinks the sota waters, and we can clarify, she's tmeya. She's asura leba'ala until we clarify the situation. And by the way, if she doesn't drink it, she needs to be divorced because she's considered tmeya. Now the sota, where did the safek come about? It came out, which as the pasuk calls it, bistira. What is stira? Stira, not as contradiction here. Stira means in private. In private. Like seter. Like seter. It came about in a private area. So this is the mikor. We learned from Sotah. It's Gemara Masechet Sotah teaches us that where you have a safek tum'ah birshut hayachid, a doubt of tum'ah in a private area, like in a enclosed area, that's going to be deemed tameh. And if it's a safek tum'ah in reshut harabim, it is tahor. Okay, that's what we learned from Sotah.
Because of the assumption that it can be tameh in the public area?
We could assume lakel, exactly. That's what we learned from Sotah. Now the case is like this. You have these open fields, which we're going to see the Mishnah Tarot talks about. Now, there were two seasons. There was the season that it gets into Ta'anit a little bit actually, when they were not planting the fields, but they were just empty fields. And there was the seasons when they were planting, and there was grains that were growing. When they were planting the fields, they didn't want people walking through their properties. That was in the winter, actually, because the grain started to grow. People are walking through, it damages my properties.
So they used to do the shvilin, the pathways, right?
Shvilin, well, around. You don't want people going through the grains. But in the summer, where they had already harvested, there's no grains in the field. Actually, one of the Tanaim that Yoshua ben Nun conquered Eretz Yisrael was people could cut through other people's properties. But again, it's only in the summer when there's no standing grains. Yemot HaChama. In Yemot HaChama, in the summer, there's no standing grains, so people could cut through. But in the Yemot HaGshamim, when the grains are growing, people don't want them cutting through, you're not allowed to. So we're going to discuss here, what is the status of those fields in both seasons? Is it considered Reshut HaYachid or Reshut HaRabim, both for Ilchot Shabbat as well as Safek Tum'ah? Let's read that inside. It says the Mishnah. V'atzanan, the Mishnah Tarot teaches us, Bik'ah, an open field of grain. B'yemot HaChama, in this summer. Now in the summer, people would cut through. But in the end of the day, it's a private property. Meaning it's my field. Hold on. It's my field. So in regards to Melechet Shabbat, listen, that's my property. The fact that people cut through it, it's still my property. It's my Reshut HaYachid. So therefore, B'yemot HaChama, Reshut HaYachid l'Shabbat. It is considered a private for Shabbat, but Reshut HaRabim l'Tum'ah. In regards to Tum'ah, Safek Tum'ah, if it comes about, we'll say Safek Tum'ah is Tahor, because people were cutting through, so it's not considered Seter. It's not considered private. It's very interesting. It's considered Reshut HaYachid that would be a sort to carry from it to Reshut HaRabim, for example, but it's Reshut HaRabim, it's not Seter, so Safek Tum'ah would be Tahor. But B'yemot HaGshamim, in the rainy season, no one's allowed to walk through there because you break my plants. So then Reshut HaYachid, the Girsah is Lekach or Lekach actually. It's considered Reshut HaYachid across the board because no one's walking through there. But what do you see from this Mishnah and Ta'arot? You see that the Bik'ah, the open area, it's not a Carmelit. What does it call it? Reshut HaYachid. Calls it Reshut HaYachid for Shabbat. Whether it's the summer or the winter, it calls it Reshut HaYachid l'Shabbat.
It's similar to the
Kasha.
The tzidei adeh that the people used to sleep next to the well.
But look, we said over here that in the Beraitta we said Bik'ah is considered Carmelit, which is not Reshut HaYachid. And this Mishnah and Tarot says very clearly, it's Reshut HaYachid l'Shabbat.
You cannot do this.
It's a stira.
Poles with
Forget about doing poles, but the point over here is, you see that the Mishnah and Tarot is telling us it's considered a private domain, or Reshut HaYachid. But our Beraitta said it's a Carmelit. So which one is it? Good question. So we have two answers. We'll do one today and the other one tomorrow. People don't live there necessarily.
So how it's become Reshut HaYachid? There's no walls also.
Let's say there are walls. Let's say it's closed in. You have to say, I guess the Chara, you have to say that.
So if there is walls and it's closed, it is Reshut HaYachid. The fact that people pass by.
Okay, but the point is, it's a kasha. There's a stira because our Beraitta says it's Carmelit, and the Mishnah says it's
how Carmelit?
Reshut HaYachid. Carmelit just means it's not Reshut HaYachid or Reshut HaRabim.
But it belongs to somebody, so I have to be.
Good question. So Amar Ula answers like this. The first answer, Ula says, La'olam Carmelit Tavya. Really, it's considered a Carmelit. And the Mishnah agrees it's a Carmelit. Amai Kari le Reshut HaYachid. So why does the Mishnah and Tarot say it's Reshut HaYachid? It doesn't mean to say it's really Be'etzem Reshut HaYachid. Rather, it means Lefi She'ena Reshut HaRabim. it's just saying it's not Reshut Harabim. That's what the Mishnah in Tarot means to say. And even though you might think it's Reshut Harabim, it's not. How does it say that it's not? By saying it's Reshut Hayachid. But really, it's not Reshut Hayachid. The Mishnah agrees it's a Carmelit. So it's just a way of speaking. So as to say, it's not a Reshut Harabim, rather it's a Carmelit. So by saying it's Reshut Hayachid, it's just a way of talking, but it means it's really a Carmelit. Now, that's a little bit of a hard answer because the word Reshut Hayachid is a very specific language. You could have said Carmelit also, but that's the first answer, and Rav Ashi will get to the second answer tomorrow. Ezat Hashem, we'll pick up with that tomorrow. Stop the bottom of Vavam with Bet. Pick up tomorrow with Zayin and with Aleph. Ezat Hashem.